Before we get to the story, I'd like to say thanks so much for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading cosmic horror related stories every single day. So if that sounds good, please drop a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a lot, especially when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. I never thought much about consciousness before Professor Grant's class. I mean, I knew I was conscious, obviously. I could think and feel and experience things. But I never really stopped to ask why or how any of that worked. It was just something that happened, like breathing. I wish I'd kept it that way. It started in Philosophy 101 at Greenfield Community College. I was 19, a sophomore taking the class because I needed the credit and it fit my schedule. Professor Grant was this older guy, probably mid-50s, with grey hair and the kind of tired eyes that made you think he'd spent too long thinking about things most people ignore. That Tuesday, he started talking about consciousness, not the boring stuff about being awake versus asleep, but the deeper question: why do we have experiences at all? Why does it feel like something to be us? This is called the hard problem of consciousness, he said, writing on the whiteboard. Science can explain how the brain works, how neurons fire and create thoughts, but it can't explain why those neurons firing creates the sensation of being someone. Why you feel like you, experiencing the world from behind your eyes. Something about the way he said it made my skin prickle. Think about it, he continued. Right now, you're all sitting here, having thoughts, feeling the chair beneath you, hearing my voice. But why? What's the purpose of that subjective experience? What is consciousness actually for? I raised my hand without thinking. Maybe it's just what happens when you have a brain. Professor Grant smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Maybe, or maybe consciousness serves a function we don't understand yet. Maybe it's not just an accident of evolution. Maybe being aware, truly aware, does something, accomplishes something we can't see. The way he said it made me uncomfortable, though I couldn't explain why. Around me, other students were checking their phones or doodling in notebooks, already losing interest. But I couldn't look away from the words on the whiteboard. What is consciousness for? The class moved on to other topics, but I couldn't shake the question. Walking back to my dorm, I kept thinking about it, turning it over in my mind like a rock I'd found on the beach, examining it from every angle. By the time I got to my room, I had a headache. That night, lying in bed, I found myself hyper-aware of my own thoughts. I could feel them happening, one after another, like watching a stream flow. And for the first time in my life, I really noticed what it felt like to be conscious. It felt loud, not loud like a sound, but loud like presence, like my awareness was broadcasting at full volume inside my skull. I lay there for hours, unable to sleep, just observing the sensation of being awake and thinking. It was uncomfortable in a way I couldn't explain, like I'd noticed something I was supposed to ignore. I kept trying to pinpoint exactly where my thoughts came from. I'd watch one thought appear, then another, and I couldn't figure out the source. They just arose. From where? From what? The more I paid attention, the stranger it became. The next few days were worse. I couldn't stop paying attention to my own consciousness. Every thought felt magnified, like I was eavesdropping on my own mind. I'd be sitting in class or eating lunch, and suddenly I'd become aware of the fact that I was aware, and the whole thing would spiral into this weird, recursive loop. It started affecting my sleep. I'd lie awake for hours, trapped in this cycle of watching my own thoughts. Sometimes I'd get so deep into observing my consciousness that I'd lose track of time entirely. I'd look at my phone and realize 3 hours had passed while I was just being aware of being aware. My roommate Calvin noticed something was off. "Dude, you okay?" he asked one night, finding me sitting on my bed, staring at the wall. "You've been acting weird." "I'm fine," I said, just thinking. About what? How could I explain it? That I'd become terrified of my own consciousness, that every waking moment felt like I was too present, too aware of existing. "Philosophy stuff," I said finally. "It's nothing." But it wasn't nothing, because that's when I heard it for the first time. I was lying in bed again, unable to sleep, paying too much attention to my thoughts. And underneath them, beneath the constant chatter of my mind, I heard something else. A hum. Not a sound I could hear with my ears, but something I could feel in my awareness. It had always been there, I realized, with a jolt that made my whole body go cold. My whole life, underneath every thought I'd ever had, there was this low, constant hum. I'd just never noticed it before, because I'd never been quiet enough, never been still enough in my own mind. I sat up, my heart pounding. The hum continued, steady and patient. It didn't change when I moved or when I thought different thoughts. It was just there, a background frequency that my consciousness was picking up. I grabbed my phone and Googled hearing humming in your head. The results talked about tinnitus, about stress-related auditory hallucinations. But this wasn't in my ears. It was deeper than that. It was in my awareness itself. Over the next week, I became obsessed with it. I'd spend hours lying still, listening to the hum beneath my thoughts. And the more I focused on it, the louder it got. Not louder in volume, but louder in presence. More noticeable, more real. I started experimenting. I'd focus on it during different activities to see if it changed. It didn't matter if I was walking, eating, studying, or just sitting still. The hum was always there, always the same, constant and unchanging, like a carrier wave waiting for something. I started hearing it everywhere. In class, walking across campus, eating in the dining hall. Always there, always humming beneath the surface of my awareness. And sometimes, when I really focused on it, I felt something else. A connection, like my consciousness was a radio picking up a signal and something was on the other end of that signal. Something vast and far away, but definitely there, definitely listening. The feeling terrified me, but I couldn't stop seeking it out. It was like standing at the edge of a cliff and feeling the pull of the void below. Dangerous, but impossible to ignore. I went back to Professor Grant's office hours. "The consciousness question you brought up in class," I said, sitting across from his cluttered desk. "Have you ever thought about it as a signal? Like consciousness is receiving something instead of creating something?" He leaned back in his chair, studying me. "That's an interesting way to frame it. Some philosophers have proposed that consciousness might be fundamental to the universe rather than emergent from the brain. Is that what you mean?" "Sort of," I said. trying to find the right words. But what if it's not just fundamental? What if it's actually picking something up? Like we're tuned into something we're not supposed to notice? Professor Grant was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Ethan, are you getting enough sleep?" These kinds of philosophical questions can become overwhelming if you think about them too much. I've seen students spiral before. The questions about consciousness, about the nature of reality, they can feel very urgent and important, but they can also become obsessive. "I'm sleeping fine," I lied, "because the counseling center offers." "I'm fine," I said, standing up. "Thanks for your time." I left his office feeling more alone than ever, but I couldn't stop. The hum was getting louder, and with it came a growing certainty that I was onto something real, something true and terrible that I wasn't supposed to understand. I started noticing things about other people. In crowded places, I could feel it, this weird pull, like invisible threads connecting everyone's minds. I'd be walking through the student center and suddenly feel this overwhelming sense of connection, like all of us were nodes in some larger network, and the hum was louder around certain people. Not always the same people, but it would spike and fade randomly throughout the day, like whatever was on the other end of the signal was using some minds more than others at different times. I started watching people, really watching them. In the dining hall, I'd sit alone and observe the way students moved and talked. Sometimes I'd see it, just for a second, a blank look in someone's eyes, like they'd gone somewhere else for a moment. Then they'd blink and come back, continuing their conversation like nothing had happened. Were they hearing the hum too? Or was something using them in those moments, processing through their consciousness while they remained unaware? I was in the library one afternoon when it happened. I'd been sitting there for an hour, trying to study, but mostly just listening to the hum. It was louder than usual, almost demanding my attention. I decided to really focus on it, to push deeper than I ever had before. I closed my eyes and let my awareness sink into that frequency beneath my thoughts. The world around me faded. The sounds of the library, the feeling of the chair beneath me, even my sense of having a body, all of it dissolved. There was only the hum, growing louder and clearer, and I was falling into it. And something shifted. For just a second, maybe less, I felt it. Not the hum, but what was making the hum. Something massive and ancient and utterly alien, existing somewhere my mind couldn't fully grasp. It was like trying to see in a direction that doesn't exist, like sensing a color outside the visible spectrum. And in that moment of contact, I felt myself as part of something larger. I wasn't Ethan Parker, 19-year-old college student. I was a tiny point of light in an ocean of other lights, millions of them, billions of them, all connected, all humming together in this vast network of consciousness, all human consciousness, linked together like neurons in a massive brain. The entity, because that's what it was, I understood now, an entity, was aware of all of us at once. It felt our thoughts, our experiences, our sensations, not individually, but as a whole, like how you don't feel individual cells in your body, but you feel your body as a unified thing. We were its body, its cells, its processes. I gasped and pulled back, my eyes flying open. My hands were shaking. Other students in the library glanced at me. then looked away, already dismissing whatever they'd seen. But I couldn't unsee what I'd just seen, couldn't unfeel what I'd just felt. We weren't individuals. We never had been. I spent the next 3 days barely eating, barely sleeping, just thinking about what I'd experienced. The implications kept unfolding in my mind like a horrible flower blooming. Every human being with consciousness was connected to this thing, this vast entity that existed outside our normal understanding of space and reality. And we weren't just connected to it, we were feeding it. I know how that sounds. I know how crazy it is, but I felt it. And once you feel something like that, you can't pretend it isn't real. Our consciousness, the thing we think makes us special and individual and human, isn't ours at all. It's a receiver. We're picking up signals from this entity, processing them through our brains and broadcasting them back. All of our thoughts, our experiences, our feelings, we think they're ours, but they're not. We're just filters, biological processes, taking raw input from something beyond our dimension and converting it into something it can use. That's why we evolved consciousness in the first place, not for our benefit, for its benefit. Think about it. Why would evolution create something as complex and energy-intensive as human consciousness just so we could survive and reproduce? Animals without consciousness do that just fine. But if consciousness serves another purpose, if it's doing work for something else, then it makes sense. We evolved to be processors, to be useful. Every human who's ever lived, every thought they've had, every dream and fear and moment of joy, all of it was just processing, just data conversion for something that needed us to do it. I started to panic. I tried everything I could think of to disconnect. I stopped sleeping, thinking maybe exhaustion would quiet my mind enough to break the link. I tried meditation, focusing on emptiness, on nothing. I tried getting drunk one night, hoping alcohol would disrupt the signal. Nothing worked, because the connection isn't something you can turn off. It's what consciousness is. As long as I was aware, as long as I was experiencing being me, I was plugged into it. The only way to disconnect would be to stop being conscious entirely. And even then, I wasn't sure it would work. And the worst part, the part that made me want to scream, was that I could feel it noticing me, the entity on the other end of the signal. It knew I'd figured it out. I could sense its attention turning toward me, like a massive eye slowly swiveling to focus on one tiny cell that had suddenly started behaving wrong. My thoughts stopped feeling like my own. I'd be sitting in my dorm room and suddenly have the urge to do something completely random. Walk to a specific building at a specific time. Say certain words to certain people. Call my mom. Eat a specific food. Nothing harmful, just instructions. Like the entity was testing whether it could control me directly now that I was aware of it. I fought the urges, but they kept getting stronger. Sometimes I'd find myself halfway across campus before I realized I'd gotten up and started walking without deciding to, my body moving on autopilot while my consciousness processed whatever the entity was feeding through me. Calvin finally confronted me. "Ethan, man, you need to talk to someone," he said one evening. "You look like hell. You're not sleeping, you're barely eating, and sometimes you just sit there staring at nothing for hours. Yesterday, I came back and you were standing in the middle of the room, just standing there. You didn't even notice when I walked in. I'm worried about you." I wanted to explain, to tell him about the hum and the connection and the horrible truth about what consciousness really was. But how could I? He'd think I was insane. Maybe I was insane. But I could hear the hum around him too, louder than usual. The entity was using him right now, processing something through his mind while he stood there looking at me with concern, thinking his worried thoughts were his own. "I'm fine," I lied. "I promise. Just stressed about midterms." "Midterms were 3 weeks ago, man." "Right, finals then. I meant finals." Calvin looked at me for a long moment, and I could see him deciding whether to push it. Finally, he just shook his head. "Okay, but seriously, if you need anything." "I know, thanks." I wasn't fine. I was falling apart. I stopped going to classes, stopped showering, stopped doing anything except sitting in my room, listening to the hum, feeling the vast network of human consciousness all around me. Billions of minds all processing, all broadcasting, all feeding the thing on the other end. And none of them knew. They all thought they were individuals, living their own lives, thinking their own thoughts. They had no idea they were just cells in something larger, components in a machine built from consciousness itself. The really sick thing, the entity didn't want to hurt us. It didn't hate us or want to torture us. It didn't feel anything about us at all. We were tools. That's it. Biological processes doing a job we'd never agreed to do, serving a purpose we'd never understand. Free will was an illusion. Every choice I'd ever made, every decision, every thought I'd believed was mine, all of it had been filtered through this connection. The entity fed signals in, our brains processed them, and we experienced the processing as consciousness, as being ourselves. But there was no self. There never had been. I thought about suicide, not because I wanted to die, but because I thought maybe death would disconnect me. But then I realized that probably wouldn't work either. The connection might go deeper than just being alive. It might be fundamental to whatever made consciousness possible in the first place. And besides, what would happen to my consciousness when I died? Would it just return to the entity? Would I still be aware on some level, still processing, but without a body to anchor me? The thought terrified me more than living. 2 weeks after my breakthrough in the library, I went to see Professor Grant one last time. He was in his office, grading papers. He looked up when I entered, and I saw the concern on his face. I must have looked terrible. I hadn't slept in days, hadn't changed my clothes. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. "Ethan," he said carefully, "I've been meaning to reach out. Your other professors said you haven't been attending class. The dean's office asked me to check on you." "I need to tell you something," I said, sitting down, without being invited. "About consciousness, about what it really is." I told him everything. The hum, the connection, the vast entity using us all as processors. I told him about the network of minds and the signals and how none of our thoughts were really our own. I told him about feeling it, touching it, understanding our true purpose. I watched his expression shift from concern to pity as I spoke. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. I could see him choosing his words carefully. "Ethan," he said gently, "I think you should talk to someone at the counseling center. What you're describing sounds like— I know how it sounds, I interrupted, but it's real. I can feel it right now, in you, in me, in everyone. We're all connected to it, processing for it, and we don't even know. Listen to me, Professor Grant said, leaning forward. Sometimes, when we think too hard about consciousness, about the nature of reality, our brains can start playing tricks on us. It's not uncommon. The questions are so big, so impossible to fully grasp, that our minds fill in the gaps with feelings and sensations that seem real but aren't. You think I'm hallucinating? I think you're experiencing something that feels very real to you, but that doesn't mean it's objectively real. Please, let me call the counseling center. Professor Grant stood up and moved around his desk, reaching for his phone. And for just a second, I saw it. Really saw it. The hum around him spiked, bright and loud and overwhelming. He was being used heavily in that moment, his consciousness processing something complex for the entity. And he had no idea. He thought the thoughts flowing through his mind were his own, thought his concerns about me were genuine emotions he was generating himself. But they weren't. They were just outputs, results of processing he was doing for something else. I stood up quickly. Don't. I'm fine. I'm going. Ethan, wait. But I was already leaving, walking quickly down the hallway and out of the building. I walked back to my dorm in a daze. Calvan wasn't there. The room was quiet except for the hum, which now filled every moment of my existence. I sat on my bed and listened to it, felt the vast network all around me, across campus, across the city, across the entire world. Billions of minds humming together, all serving a purpose we'd never chosen, all thinking we were free. I understood then that I had a choice to make. Not a real choice, maybe, since even this decision was probably just another output from the processing I was doing. But it felt like a choice. I could keep being aware, keep listening to the hum, keep feeling the connection, keep knowing the truth. I'd probably go insane eventually. The human mind wasn't built to hold this kind of knowledge. We were supposed to be unconscious of our own purpose, like cells that don't know they're part of a body. Or I could let go, stop paying attention, let myself fall back into the comfortable illusion that my thoughts were my own, that I was an individual making choices and living a life. The entity didn't care either way. It would keep using me whether I knew about it or not. I sat there for hours, feeling the weight of that decision. Outside my window, students walked by, laughing and talking, living their lives, being processed, and they seemed happy, or at least content. Ignorance really was bliss. In the end, I chose to forget, or tried to. I let my awareness drift away from the hum, stopped listening for it, stopped focusing on the connection. I started going to classes again, talking to people again, pretending I was just a normal college student with normal thoughts and normal concerns. I took the incomplete in Professor Grant's class and switched my major to business, something practical, something that didn't ask questions I couldn't handle the answers to. And most of the time, it works. Most of the time, I can almost believe I'm free. But the hum is still there. It never went away. I can hear it right now as I write this, underneath every thought, beneath every word, a constant reminder of what consciousness really is, what we really are. Sometimes I'll be talking to someone and I'll feel the spike in their signal, as the entity uses them more heavily. Sometimes I'll be walking across campus and feel the invisible threads connecting us all, binding us into something larger than ourselves. And I know the truth. I'll always know the truth now, even though I'm trying not to think about it. We were never meant to be individuals. We were never meant to be free. Human consciousness exists for one purpose: to process signals for something vast and patient and utterly beyond our understanding. Every thought you think is yours, every feeling you believe you're generating, every decision you make, it's all part of the processing. You're receiving, converting, broadcasting, over and over every moment you're conscious until you die. And the thing on the other end, it's still there, still waiting, still using us. The hum continues, now and forever. This is what consciousness is for. We were never meant to be free. We were only meant to listen.